How's it going, guys? Padraig here for another video for Knives and Tools, and today we are going to talk about cordage, or more specifically paracord. This is the Knives and Tools brand of paracord. They very kindly sent me to do this video with you guys, so thank you very much. It's 550 type 3 paracord and it comes in 100 feet, so really cool. Thanks for sending that. We are going to look at cordage, more specifically paracord, but cordage in general in your camp setup. Why do we carry it, and why it's useful, why it's important, and also how to carry it in a way that you're not using it up too quickly, that you're able to manage it, that you're able to contain it, and you're able to transport it very easily without it getting knotted up and things like that on you. So we're going to look at that. We're also going to look at the different types of paracord. We're going to look at some useful knots, some of the knots that I use quite often when I'm camping, and I feel like would be very beneficial to anybody. And particularly there's things that you can kind of practice when you're at home. If you're stuck at home, you don't have to necessarily be outside to be practicing your knots. So I think that's going to be useful. We're also going to look at maybe making some paracord bracelets, because I believe that is something that can be fun at home to practice, but it's also actually a really efficient way of carrying a lot of paracord. You can make paracord bracelets or things, and you can have them on your keychain, you can have them on your wrist, and it's a very easy way to carry cordage. So I suppose the first thing we can talk about is the different types of paracord that are out there. It goes from type 1 to type 2, type 2A, all the way up to type 4. And the differences between them are the tensile strength of them, so how much weight they can hold, but also how many inner strands are contained within the piece of paracord. So 550 type 3 paracord is the stuff that we use, and for all intents and purposes, it's going to be perfect for the majority of the types of camp crafts and skills that we would need cordage for. The reason it's called 550 is because it has a tensile strength of 550 pounds. So it can actually hold 550 pounds of weight. Type 3 paracord has 7 inner strands contained within the outer core. Those 7 strands are also made up of 2 ply, so 2 pieces of woven nylon, and 7 of those then are contained within the mantle of the paracord itself, and that's kind of what gives it its strength. There's also a military spec one, which is a military grade type 3 paracord. Still has 7 inner strands. It's actually made of 3 ply instead of 2 ply woven nylon on the inside of the mantle. These inner strands can be further reduced down to their smallest state, so you can take these 7 strands within paracord and you can then split them up again, and it's very useful for things like emergency fishing line and things like that. So the advantage of paracord, carrying paracord, is that all the elements can be broken down into smaller parts, and they're all very useful. So why do we carry paracord and not take cordage off the land? Well, cordage itself is actually a very difficult thing to replicate in the wild, at least in large amounts of it. It takes a very long time to dig up from the ground, or to take from, like, let's say the bark of a tree or something, and bind it into something that's a usable, strong piece of cordage, particularly if you're talking about emergency situations where you need to put up a shelter, or you want to put up a tent, or you want to create something. Cordage is just easier to carry than it is to make, and it's one of the main reasons why we carry it in our kit. Yes, of course, you could go super primitive on it, and you could make cordage yourself. It would take a very long time though. So for all intents and purposes, this is why we carry cordage. There are many different ways that we can transport and use our cordage, and we can have it in very simple containment systems that are accessible to us. And we're going to look at a couple of those today. The reason why we carry paracord is for camp crafts, for shelter setups and things like that. It's not supposed to be a disposable cordage system. You're supposed to be able to dismantle it, take it down, reuse a piece of paracord over and over again. It's not something that's supposed to be used to just tie something quickly together or lash something together and then either thrown away or cut off or things. And one of the main reasons why paracord ends up being discarded is because people's knots are wrong, and they can't get the knot out and they end up just cutting it, and it gets shorter and shorter and shorter until the piece of cordage is actually unusable. So most of the knots that we're doing today, or all of them really, are knots that can be easily taken apart, and therefore you don't have to cut your cordage, and therefore makes your cordage a lot more economically friendly, but also more beneficial to you, so you don't have to keep going out and buying new paracord. And one of the main ways that we can ensure that our paracord is tidy and that we're not using up too much of it is how it's contained and how we kind of carry it. So let's have a look at that now, the way that we carry it, and also the different ways that it can be used. The Knivesandtools Paracord, it comes in, as I said, it comes in 100 feet. The first thing I would do actually is cut that in half into two more manageable hanks of cordage of 50 feet each. You're never going to need to carry 100 feet of paracord. I can't see any situation besides maybe making a net or something specifically from paracord where you would need that much cordage, particularly on an overnight camp situation or something like that. So I have taken the 550 cordage, and as I said, I've broken them down into, so this was originally a roll of 100 feet. What I've done is I've broken them into 250 feet. And the way in which I manage this, and I will show you, so this is a bowline knot at the end here, which I will show you when we get to knots. But the way I have constructed this is that there's a bowline at the end of it. It's wrapped around, and the idea is that you can take cordage from this as you need it, and it's still hanked and contained, so you don't need to be unraveling the whole thing before you can use it. It's quite easy to take as much as you need to be using in that particular moment, be that for setting up a ridge line or for something that you might need, but it still contains and it still stays tidy. So it's a really interesting way of carrying your cordage. Another good way to manage your cordage is to carry smaller hanks. So this is roughly 5 feet. I know this because my arm span is roughly about the same height as me. So I'm 5 foot 8 inches high. I don't know for you Europeans what that is in centimeters, but essentially if I put my arms out, I know that that's roughly 5 feet 8 inches. So I round it off to, let's say, 5 feet. And I know that my piece of cordage is going to be 5 feet if it's the same width as my arm span. I have a bowline at the end of this. Again, I will show you this knot, but the advantage of carrying smaller pieces of cordage means that you're less likely to be cutting off pieces of your main cordage as you might need them. So if I know that I'm carrying a couple of these in my pocket for tasks that we will go through later on, it's just really handy to have. You can also extend that piece if you need to. So if you have two of these, for example, with bowlines in the end of them, it's very easy to duplicate that into 10 feet of paracord should you need it. So you could very easily just loop the two together, and then you've got 10 feet of paracord. And again, that's something that's very easy to keep in your pocket that you're not going to be removing from your larger piece of paracord. So that's a kind of little bit on cordage management. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through some useful knots. I'm going to go through the way that I hank this cord, and also then we're going to look at making some paracord bracelets. So stick with me. So now I'm going to show you how to take this 50 feet and hank it into a controllable kind of system that you can extend as you need it. So what we're going to do first is take your hand out like this. So you're going to be wrapping between your thumb and your pinky here. So we take the end with the bowline, put it into our hand like this. So we have this bit feeding off here, and then what we're going to do is very simply just make figure of eights around your hand. So around the thumb and around the pinky there, and we just hank the whole thing up. Then when we get to about here, and we've got most of the cordage, and we still have a bit of a free section here, what we're going to do is we're going to take this off our hand, so we have a nice clean chunk of it there, and then we're just going to take this bit and we're just going to wrap it around. You can wrap this as tight as you like. the tighter you go, the kind of tidier it's probably going to be. And then when you've got like maybe just enough for one more to go around, put your thumb in place instead, wrap it over your thumb. And when you pull it around, then you've got a little loop. Just feed it under the loop and tie it off as tight as you can do it. And then what you're left with is a nice tidy bundle that can be extended as needs be. Okay, so the first knot we're going to learn today is the bowline knot, or bowline knot. It's a really useful knot, and it's something that I tend to keep at the end of my cordage, because it's really handy for looping around things, for binding other pieces of cordage and things together. So it's just a really useful knot to know, and it's specifically used to keep loops at the end of your cordage. So very simply, first thing that we do is we kind of twist it. We twist the piece of cordage so it makes this loop here, and we want to make sure that the bit this is called our working end. The working end is under this bit. So we've made a loop. Then what we want to do is we want to take this working end and go back up through. So we're up through the loop. Take that, go around the back side of the loop, loop this around and feed it back through again. So I'll go over that again. And then what you do is you just tie it up, and that's what it is. So I'll go over that with you one more time. So we twist, create a loop, under, around, and tighten. So you can see here on this tree that I've actually used the bowline to secure my main ridgeline, or my main piece of paracord, to this tree here, simply by putting a stick in here. So essentially all I've done is taken that bowline at the end of my paracord, pulled through a section of it from the other side, just put a stick in there, and then just secured it down. So it's a very easy way to secure a piece of cordage to a tree. Let's say if you're building a ridgeline for your tarp or something like that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this out of the way, and we're going to move on to the next knot that I'm going to teach you guys, which is called the Marlin spike hitch. So the Marlin spike hitch is a really what I would consider a very useful knot to use, or to know rather. You can look up the uses for the Marlin spike hitch online, and you'll see just how applicable it is. You can use it to make ladders, to make climbing ladders. You can use it to secure things to a tree. You can use it to as a basis for a pot hanger. Really useful knot. And it's also, if you know the actual shape of the Marlin spike hitch, you can extend it later on down the line to a trucker's hitch, which we're also going to look at. So the first part of that is the Marlin spike hitch. And all you got to do is, you got to take your cordage, get 2 fingers, and make a loop around it like this. So you made yourself a loop. Then all you have to do is, so either fold it up or keep your fingers into it, and then grab the other end and pull it through that loop. And then what you're left with is this kind of thing. Then all we do is we take a stick, feed it through, tighten it all up, and you've got then something that can be used maybe to as I said, to maybe hang your jacket or hang your coat off. I use it to suspend my backpack off the ground when I'm in the woods, so it's not getting crawled on by insects and things like that. It's extremely easy to take apart as well. All you got to do is pull this guy out and your cordage comes free. So I'll do that one more time. So okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is called the trucker's hitch. It is an extremely versatile and useful hitch. or knot that we can use to not only cinch things down on the back of a truck like a canoe or logs, for example, as the name might suggest, but it's also, as we were doing here, used to create a really tight ridgeline for your shelter system. Also, the fact that all the knots are really easily broken down and taken apart, as we spoke about, you're not going to use or ruin your paracord by using this system. So the first thing that we are going to do is very similar to what we did with the Marlin spike hitch. So if you learned that, then this should be pretty easy. Basically taking your 2 fingers and making that loop that we spoke about. But instead of putting a stick through here like we normally would, we're just going to pull it tight and actually just make a loop on our line there. It's important that the knot is on this side and not on this side. If it's on this side, when you pull this through, it's actually just going to tighten up on itself. Whereas if you put it on this side, it's going to keep this loop. So just to bear that in mind. So the next thing we are going to do is feed our line through here. So this is our working end. So we'll feed it through that loop that we've just created. And then what we're left with is this sort of system here. So then what I can do is, and the advantage of this is that I can pull this really, really tight, and it allows to get a really tight kind of system set up here. So let's just give that a pull. And you can see, as you can probably imagine, this is pretty tight now. This is the next part of the trucker's hitch. The problem here is it's really tight now, but as soon as I let this go, it's going to loosen straight back up again. And trying to tie this off is going to be extremely difficult. So a very simple, quick fix for that. Instead of wrapping it through this loop once, what we do is we actually wrap it through twice. And what we do is we ensure that the second wrap, if we can get this through, the second wrap is going to be under the first one. So when we pull this, what should happen is this bottom knot is going to bind up and catch on the top of this one, essentially binding this up to allow us to tie it off. So let's see if this works. I have let the line go, and it's staying tight. So it's a good way to keep your, and we could probably go tighter actually. It's a good way to keep your ridgeline tight while you tie it off. I wouldn't leave it like this. Eventually this is going to unbind itself, but it's really good right now that it's like this so that we can finish off this trucker's hitch. So the very final thing that we need to do to finish this off and to make sure it stays secure is to do a very simple overhand knot by leaving a bite through so it's easy to release again. And to do that, all we simply do, put our line over the top of it there, go under with a bite like this, and simply pull. And we can pull that nice and tight. And I've left this here because what it means now, rather than pulling the entire piece of line through, if I just pull this end, it should just easily loosen everything out, and therefore not causing any issues with knots left in your line or anything like that. So that's extremely useful. You can keep a shelter on that. You could use that on the back of a truck, as we said, if you wanted to tie something down. Really, really, really useful knot. So that's something that you guys can be practicing at home. You could tie it off 2 chairs. You could tie it off your fridge. I'm sure you'll figure it out. And then all we got to do then to release it. Take this, pull that. Everything should come apart. Then what we're left with this guy, we should be able to just pull that apart, and there you go. All your knots have been taken out of your paracord, saving you having to cut any loose line or anything like that. That's your trucker's hitch. Get practicing, guys. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to look at today is one of these guys. This is a paracord bracelet style kind of knotting system here. It's a really fun way, I suppose, of keeping yourself a piece of fail-safe emergency cordage. This is obviously not going to be something that you would do on a regular basis to keep your cordage kind of tied up. But if it was your last resort and all you needed was a piece of maybe a 6 foot or 5 foot length of paracord, then this could be a really cool way of containing it. You could have this on your keychain. You could hook it on the back of your backpack, maybe with a lanyard or something like that. And it's just a really useful thing to have. This is enough cordage in an emergency situation for a number of things. For example, if your shoelace broke, you could use it as an emergency shoelace. It would also be long enough to use for a bow drill. If you wanted to, if you needed a piece of cordage for your bow drill bow to create a fire, you could use it as an emergency pot hanger. And there's so many different ways that you could use this if you needed it in an emergency. So what we're going to do is we're going to create something like this out of a piece of cordage about this long. We're going to bring it in half like this, and then we're going to half it again. So essentially quartering. So then what we're going to do is we're going to go up this end, and basically what we're left with is this kind of system. So we've got our loop at the end here, we've got our loop at the end here, and then this piece of cordage is halved then. The first few are a little bit finicky until you kind of tighten it up, and then the system kind of starts to make sense. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take one end of our cordage, bring it over the other side. So bring it over the entire piece there. So it's like this. So with the end that's not looped, we're going to go over the top of that piece of cordage there, like that. We're going to go around the back, and we're going to go under and through this other loop that we've just created. And we'll try and tighten that up a little bit. Again, it's a little bit finicky at the beginning until you kind of get a few of these kind of knotted up. Then we're going to do the opposite. So we created a loop on this side the first time, so now we're going to create a loop on this side. So the loop goes over and over the entire piece. And this guy, as we said, goes over that line and under the back and through that loop that we just created. And then we'll give that a tighten. So pull everything tight, and you can see here that we've already started to create that pattern. So what we're going to do now is just bring the loop on the opposite side again, and then essentially the loop just keeps switching from one side to the other all the way down. So I'll do a couple of these again. I'll just keep going, and hopefully you guys can see where the pattern is coming in. So loop, over, under, pull it tight. Loop, over, under, pull it tight. And hopefully you'll get faster at this as you work. Sometimes if you lose track of which way the loop is supposed to go, that's okay. You can just go back once or twice. If you do mess up and you accidentally put a loop twice on one side, I would recommend that you go back and fix it rather than kind of just following through, because what you'll be left with is a really annoying kind of kink in your actual setup here. So we'll just keep going until I guess we run out of line here. And while you're doing this, you should be constantly sort of pulling it tight and pushing it down, and then you're getting a really nice tight weave on that. Well guys, I really hope you got something useful from today's video, whether that's learning some new knots, whether that's some cordage management, maybe making yourself a paracord lanyard. Hopefully there's something there that we can all learn from. Those knots that I taught you today, they are knots that I use all the time, and I think they're really, genuinely really useful knots to know, and they're going to be a really solid foundation for you to expand on should you want to learn more. Of course there are other knots that I do use, but they're a really good start. So from me here in Sweden, again, I want to say stay safe, get practicing. You can do this stuff at home, and we'll see you guys soon for another video. So thanks.